Hello, Asher?
Yes.
Hey, how are you? This is Aleksandr Sigalov. You wanted to talk to me?
Yes. Hi.
So, how can I help you?
I saw a few of your videos, and I find them interesting, and I think that we have a lot in common. Although we end up at different conclusions, I find it interesting to just talk to people who I agree with at least 50%. And
Sure.
I'm not really calling to debate you. I really want
That's
to
fine.
interview you more, really consider you a full Jew. And the reason I say that is because most Orthodox Jews would not, mainly because you don't accept the oral law or rabbinic literature or Jews of today. Really, it's just one commandment, at least from the rabbinic perspective, the commandment of heeding the instructions of the court, or at least the people we think are the court.
Okay.
In my opinion, on something so small, I don't think it's enough to cast someone away as a Gentile.
Okay.
So I read that you're a Levite and you come from a ethnically Jewish family?
Well, not really. I am a Levite, yes, but my family is actually secular. I had to do a DNA test to find out that I was a Levite. I didn't know that. I felt it. Even my last name is Levitical, but I didn't know that I was actually Levite. So I did a pretty expensive DNA test to figure it out, and I talked to a geneticist. So yeah, But my family is secular. They started to observe a little bit thanks to my efforts, but they used to be secular. So
How long have you been involved in Judaism?
Well, that's what I was going to tell you. I actually kind of like converted to Orthodox Judaism when I was maybe like 22. Chabad, as a lot of people do. And, I was Orthodox Jew for maybe 2 or 3 years. But after being, in the community and, seeing how they do things, I realized that they do not really follow the Torah. They follow the traditions and they follow some religion. So I found it to be unacceptable for, what I was looking for. I essentially quit Chabad and I started to observe Torah on my own.
Was this in California that you converted?
Yes, it was here in Los Angeles. In Russia, I was non-observant. I wasn't even circumcised.
Well, that's an interesting story. I don't think I've met anyone who converted Orthodox and then remained religiously Jewish but joined another group, another sect. Do you belong to a different group or are you completely independent?
I guess I'm independent, but I have my own circle of friends. I have several friends who share my views, and I was actually going to give you a link to a YouTube channel of one of my friends where you can see his lectures. He talks about basically the same thing. We have little disagreements here and there, but essentially he pretty much shares my views. So there are people who do that. I'm not the only one.
Interesting. Have you met anyone who converted and ended up in the same path that you're in now? Yeah,
I know, and this is why it was hard for me too, because I was looking to find, like-minded people, and of course, most of them were either secular or religious, and I'm kind of in the middle, I am Torah observant, but I'm not religious, so,
So you're saying that you haven't found someone who converted Orthodox, who did what you did, and then in some way reverted to the path that you're on now?
No, my friend came to Torah from Christianity, for example. So he followed a slightly different path. He was actually religious, brought up as a religious Christian, but then he realized that it was also religion and tradition, and he essentially came, I believe he was a Karaite for a little bit, and then he became Torah-centric, like I am. So, yeah.
Were you ever a Christian before?
Me?
Yes.
Am I a Christian? No.
No.
Never a Christian. My family is Jewish, so, why would I be Christian? No.
I mean in the past, before you converted to Judaism.
No. No. I read the Christian Bible. That's the only thing that I did. But again, I never really felt it. So it wasn't. No, I'm not Christian. In fact, I don't like Christianity.
So you went from secularism to Judaism.
Yeah.
In terms of belief.
Yes. From atheism, because I'm from former Soviet Union. We were all atheists, so I didn't have any belief. I didn't even believe in God. So
interesting.
Life is really strange. I know.
So I converted to Judaism about 20 years ago. Before converting to Judaism, I was a Baptist minister. I went to seminary as a Christian. And I came to the realization that Jesus wasn't God or the Messiah. And I felt that I was forced to become Jewish. Where do I go from there?
Yes.
However, when I entered Judaism, I always said to myself, I didn't leave one cult to enter another cult. Then I always questioned. I didn't just accept what people were trying to teach me as truth without first trying to verify it rationally, historically, and most importantly, ethically. And that's where I am today. I teach ethical, rational Judaism from its pure state. The thing is, Orthodox Judaism doesn't have great representatives. If you type in Orthodox Judaism on YouTube, you're mainly going to get Chabad and other mystics explaining their form of Judaism, which is tinged with asceticism and Kabbalistic ideas. And then people get a misrepresentation of what Judaism really is. Now, I have met many Chabadniks who've dropped Judaism in general. For example, Matisyahu. I'm sure you're familiar with him, right? He was a Baal Tshuva. Like many Baal Tshuvas in Chabad, they get burned out because they're fed so much nonsense. Instead of doing what you did and saying that religion isn't the problem, it's just this movement is the problem, these individuals dropped religion completely. They dropped God instead of just redirecting their efforts elsewhere.
Like of the Derek people, for example.
Right. It's very commendable that you left one type or one segment of Judaism for another one instead of just dropping Judaism in general. We see the same thing in Christianity.
Yes.
Christians in college, when they get someone disproving Christianity to them, and then they just become secular, become ethically immoral, instead of saying, no, I'm not going to drop God. I'm just going to in some way find a different vehicle to God.
Yes, I absolutely agree. A lot of people make a mistake that they confuse religion with the Torah. I'm using slightly different terminology. It's religion that's the problem. It's not the Torah that's the problem, because the Torah, or how some say Torah, it's not a religious book at all. It's a book of scientific truths. Like take the Ten Commandments, for example. If you're a normal person, can you disagree with at least one of these commandments? Of course not. Would you say that murdering is okay? No. Would you say that stealing is okay? No. Would you say that adultery is okay? No. This is just a common sense. It has nothing to do with religion at all. You don't have to believe it.
It's like ingrained in people. It's like a basic sense of morality.
It's common sense. Any reasonable person should understand it. But then we get religion, which puts all these stupid rules and fences, as they call them, and turns it into something cheap and ridiculous. So you can't watch television on Shabbat, or you can't go to hospital on Shabbat. This is just crazy. This is
right. So I don't think Orthodox Jews teach that you can't go to the hospital on Shabbat. You could absolutely go to the hospital on Shabbat.
I'm just saying,
an example. I understand it's an example.
They for example, I read in the news recently, one family left a hot plate burning on Shabbat, and they burned down. They all died. So this is definitely not correct. This is not what God intended. He did not intend them to die. And these people, these souls of these people are on religion, on the rabbis. This is why I don't believe in religion or tradition. Because Torah, it's completely different from all that crap, And I understand why religion is appealing to a lot of people. It gives them a sense of community and acceptance, but it's fake. It's just a charade, So, you have to choose for yourself.
Orthodox Judaism, it's based, at least from our understanding, on something concrete that was corrupted, and it's still being corrupted nowadays. I belong to more of a rationalist camp, which is why I'm not a Chabadnik. I'm more of a Rambam guy, even though I don't only go by the Rambam. In other words, I try to find the philosophical, ethical purpose of Torah, the actual tamim, like the actual purpose of the mitzvot. I think that the reason someone should try to keep mitzvot is to try to make the world a better place. It just seems that the ultimate goal in Torah is peace. The Almighty constantly promises peace. If we keep His hukim, His mishpatim, He never promises us eternal life, a world to come, hell. This is what religion has created. It seems that our patriarchs did good for the sake of doing good. And that's something that's been lost nowadays. Nowadays, people don't want to do a mitzvah unless they're promised get-out-of-jail-free points.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Like, especially, I'm baffled by confessions in Christianity. You know, you can kill somebody, just go to confession booth, and you're forgiven. You know, how convenient, right?
So that exists nowadays in the Orthodox world. I remember when I lived in Israel, I was learning in this place called Esha Torah, and they would hire boys in the yeshiva to say Kaddish. They would pay them to say Kaddish for people who didn't have someone to say Kaddish for them. So how is that not identical to indulgences, to what Martin Luther was fighting against, paying to get out of hell? Now, I'm not Kabbalistically inclined. I don't believe in this notion of an aliyas neshama, that every time someone says Kaddish, you get out of Gehenna one step. I don't believe in Kabbalah. I don't believe in the Zohar. But I do believe in halakha.
Okay.
Judaism is Torah Shebiktav, which is only the 5 books of Moses, and Torah Shebal Peh, which are the instructions laid down by the Sanhedrin. However, the Sanhedrin was dismantled after the destruction of the Second Temple, completely dismantled in 300 of the Common Era.
Yes, that's fair. I can ask you a question,
sure,
if you don't mind. You're talking about the legitimacy of the Sanhedrin, but on what base do you find it legitimate? Torah never says to make such thing. Torah never says to create a Sanhedrin. So that was a temple invention. It was something that was created in the temple times. It was not originally how it was practiced in the days of Moses, for example. In the days of Moses, they had judges, yes, I agree, but they didn't have a court of judges that decided everything, especially matters of the Torah. Matters of the Torah were reserved specifically to the Levites and more specifically to the priests, to the Aaronites. Only the priests, only the high priest could decide the matters of the Torah. In fact, he would use the tabernacle to get answers to the questions when the questions were too difficult to deal with. So it was direct divine intervention. You know, it was not some man-made court. You know, so
it appears 3 places in Torah. One is in the first chapter of Deuteronomy. The second one is Deuteronomy chapter 17, and in the book of Numbers. In the book of Numbers, it gives a number 70. It tells Moses to establish a court of 70 elders, 71 with himself. There's also the idea that was proposed by Jethro, that the Almighty later used in Deuteronomy chapter 17 of Moses establishing chiefs and judges. But Deuteronomy chapter 17 is the main pasuk that we use to establish his idea. But that it's not only Kohanim and Levium, because it says that you shall take them to the priests, Levites, and the judges of that day.
Judges would decide civil matters, but the Levites would decide matters of the Torah. Judges have
it doesn't make a distinction. In that chapter, it doesn't make a distinction. I understand that in many ceremonial issues, that it was actually the Kohanim who would determine if something was saras, if something was leprous or not, and would declare you clean. There's examples of that. But Deuteronomy chapter 17 makes no distinction in who decides what. It mentions judges, it mentions priests, and it mentions Levites. And then in 2 Chronicles, now this is outside of Torah, but just as a historical reference, in 2 Chronicles chapter 8, verse 14, it mentions the same idea as Deuteronomy chapter 17 of priests, Levium, and it says judges from all the ruling families of Israel, saying that it's not only Levium, because we know Kohanim and Levium are from the same tribe. So the understanding, and I understand that this is a leap of faith, but the leap of faith is that the individuals that appear in the Talmud are who they claim to be. Because the individuals in the Talmud claim to sit on this Sanhedrin. It says in Deuteronomy chapter 17 that they will judge from the place that God will choose.
Yes,
now we can debate.
Yes, it's
absolutely. The tabernacle and the temple are the same thing.
What do you
the
mean?
Mishkan?
It's completely two different things.
No.
It's completely foreign to the Torah. It has its own rituals and its own plan. It's completely different. Haven't you read the Ezekiel, for example? It's like it's completely different.
The temple was never built on Ezekiel's vision of what the temple should be. This is why the rabbis had a problem with even canonizing the book of Ezekiel, because it doesn't match up with what appears in right. But that's not the building of the temple. Don't forget, Ezekiel came after Solomon. Solomon built the temple with the same diagram as the tabernacle. There's no such thing as temple in Torah. The word is Mishkan.
Yes,
Beit HaMikdash.
Excuse me, Asher, but who authorized the temple? Who said to build me the temple? Where in the Torah it says, build me temple? Who authorized Solomon?
This idea of temple doesn't exist. A temple is just the base.
The first temple existed.
Hold on one second. The temple just means the base. The Mishkan is built on top of the temple. And the Mishkan is identical to the traveling Mishkan, the traveling tabernacle pre the Hebrews entering Israel.
I'm sorry, but this doesn't make sense to me. What do you mean it's built on top of the temple? It's like on the roof or something?
The commandment to build a temple, if you look in Sefer Mitzvot, it always points back to the mitzvah of building a Mishkan. There's no ultimate difference between...
No, I understand, but there is a huge...
The Beit HaMikdash and the Mishkan.
You don't see it. That's my point. You're projecting the temple onto the tabernacle, and this is completely made-up idea. This is rabbinic idea.
So we're getting stuck on semantics. Someone wanted to level the Har Habayit, the whole Kotel, that whole area, and just build a Mishkan. That would be what we call a temple nowadays. It's really just semantics. It's really a Mishkan. There's no commandment to build a temple. There's a commandment to build a Mishkan. I agree with you. The temple is the platform. It says in Deuteronomy chapter 17 that they will judge from the place I will choose. So this place, according to Jewish history, was Yerushalayim. But we know the Mishkan traveled. It was in Shiloh. It could have been anywhere God has chosen. Exactly. I agree that God...
It's not necessarily Jerusalem. It's not necessarily Jerusalem. It could be any place. Mishkan was designed to be portable.
Absolutely.
So in this regard, I don't agree with the temple claim, because yeah, sure, we can put a Mishkan on top of the Temple Mount. I agree that, but it doesn't mean it's going to stay there. You know, it's going to move one way or another. You know, when God decides to move, He'll move.
I don't see a problem with that statement.
I agree that Judah is the ruler of the Hebrew people in a way, like kingship, you know, in terms of kingship. I agree.
Sort of. I mean, that's if you interpret Genesis chapter 49 to mean that. I mean, no one really knows what that pasuk really means in terms of Shiloh.
As I understand it, it means that Judah will have authority over Hebrew people until God comes back. This is my interpretation of the passage. And this is true. Look at this. Judah is the only tribe that preserves its identity. We even call Hebrews Jews. Like in Russia, for example, they don't call us Jews. They call us Hebrews. This is a proper term for all the Hebrews. Every Jew is a Hebrew, but not every Hebrew is a Jew. I'm a Levite, for example. I'm not Jewish, but I am Hebrew. So, you know.
I would say there's a debate on why they're called Jews nowadays. Because Levi, being that they lived predominantly in Judah because the temple was there, they belong to the kingdom of Judah. Also, Benjamin was partially in Judah, which is why Mordechai is called the Jew. But if you accept all this, well, then you would have to validate the Tanakh to a certain extent, because a lot of this history came mainly to the Book of Chronicles.
I don't dismiss the Tanakh completely. I just can't verify it, so to me it's completely useless. The problem is that most stories that we have in the Tanakh, they from way back, they like 3,000 years old, and we don't have any other witnesses to corroborate the story. So how can I be sure that it's true? I can't. So this is why I believe only in the Torah and what it says. Because, Tanakh, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I know some of it is definitely not true, like Ezekiel, for example. But other things, like story of, like Joshua, book of Joshua, I'm not sure. I don't know. But to be safe, I follow and believe only in the Torah. And that's perfectly enough for me. I know that it may not be enough for some people, but it's enough for me, and it works really well. I don't feel like I'm missing something.
The rabbis in the Talmud actually felt the same way. They always constantly made a huge distinction between rabbinic law and Torah law. In other words, the Torah is the basis. All the fences are there to protect the words that appear in the Torah.
It backfired. It turned into a religion. It turned into tradition and religion.
Right.
It backfired.
Absolutely.
So
it absolutely backfired. Well, this is not the first time that Israel has gone into exile. And then Israel repented, and then God brought them back. In other words, according to the plain text of the Torah alone, Deuteronomy chapter 27, 28, 29, Leviticus chapter 26, when Israel sins, God's going to exile them. When they repent, God's going to bring them back. And this is going to happen over and over again.
Yes,
now,
you're absolutely right.
So, technically, we're going to have more than 2 sanctuaries or 2 temples. We're going to have 100 temples. Why not? If you only listen to Chabad.org, then you only get one interpretation of what Judaism is. I encourage you to consider, let's say, Sefer Mitzvot to the Rambam, the enumeration of the commandments. And I understand that it's more than 613. 613 is just a tradition. But even, for example, the idea of Mashiach, right? The Rambam says, where's the mitzvah in the Torah to believe in Mashiach? He links it to the end of Deuteronomy chapter 17 that says that when you're ready to establish a king for yourself, right, that you shall establish one that God will choose. So the idea that became perverted of a Messiah, both in the Christian and Jewish world, was an idea that appeared in the Torah about electing a king, and they ran with it. So when someone asks me that if I believe in the Messiah, I say, for sure I believe in the Messiah, but like the Torah says. And he's not necessarily anointed with oil, because the Torah doesn't say we anoint kings. That's a later practice. It appears in Tanakh, but it doesn't appear in Torah. Now, Kohanim are anointed, but not kings, at least according to the Pashat of Torah Shabbat.
You're forgetting that only the priests could be anointed. We prohibited to anoint anybody else but the priests.
That's what I just said. Right. The Torah says only the priests are anointed, but Tanakh says that prophets are anointed and kings are anointed. So
yes,
if they're anointed...
That doesn't make sense to me, for example. How could they do it? With what oil? With the holy oil? That was prohibited. That was prohibited by death. So
Orthodox Jews believe in rabbinic law. So rabbinic law are the rulings of the Sanhedrin. So in other words, it's kind of hard for someone on their own to live out a Torah lifestyle in unison with someone else. In other words, I could keep Torah one way. I could decide for myself what a melacha is, and you could decide for yourself. But I'll never be able to eat in your house or vice versa. My daughter won't be able to marry your son because
yes, that's why
there isn't a consensus.
If you want to know what to do, ask a Levite. Why are you asking a rabbi? Rabbi is completely foreign. Rabbi at best can be considered as shar, like a head of tens of head of hundreds or head of thousands. But a rabbi, it's not he has no authority to decide Torah matters. If you want to decide Torah matters, you go to Levites or judges, just like the Torah says.
However, we believe in the Orthodox world that the Sanhedrin had this authority, and the Sanhedrin was made up of Levites. As a matter of fact, we believe every tribe had their own court. There was one main Sanhedrin on the place that God himself chose, which is in the Lishkat Hagazit, which is on the Temple Mount, room of hewn stones. But this court was made up of Kohanim, Levites, and regular Jews, as it appears in 2 Chronicles. However, towards the end of the Second Temple,
what's going on. I don't know what was going on.
And we believe this in faith. I mean, I'm not trying to convince you of it.
Sorry. I apologize. Go ahead.
We believe this in faith, that the group that appeared in the time of the Second Temple during the time of the Mishnah, but that this is the same group that appeared in Deuteronomy chapter 17 and also in the book of Chronicles and when Ezra brought the Jews back from Babylon, in the group that we consider to be called the men of the Great Assembly. But during the Second Temple, the priesthood became corrupted. I mean, this is not even from religious sources. You could read it from Josephus.
I agree. I know about
that.
Levites lost their power because of that.
Well, not just that they lost their power, but they were pretty much in bed with the Romans. And a lot of them just became secular and just went through the motions, but weren't really involved in Torah life. So the judges took over the Sanhedrin. And this is really the beginning of the Mishnah. Although when there were Levites in the Sanhedrin, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin supposed to be the Kohen Gadol, because the Nasi, the 71st member, always represented Moshe Rabbeinu, who himself was a Kohen. But when they weren't capable of fulfilling their duties, the other judges took over. So this is why it seems that in the Mishnah they're asking rabbis instead of asking the Kohen Gadol. But it's not that they were against the system laid down in the Torah, but within that system, it allowed them to elect other judges. If you didn't have Kohanim, what does that mean? That you couldn't have a Sanhedrin? No, the court went on. Now, after the dismantlement, the complete dismantlement of the Sanhedrin, which is in the 3rd century of the Common Era, no Jewish leader had any power. In other words, we believe that, as it states in Torah, that the Almighty ordered Moses to put on Joshua, on the elders, what he put on him, that this act, that in Hebrew is called smicha, was transferred from teacher to student all the way to the dismantlement of the Sanhedrin. And when that line was cut, no one else had authority to establish rabbinic law, not Torah law. They always made a distinction between rabbinic law and Torah law, because right when they would call rabbinic law Torah law, they would be violating that Isur, the Isur of being a Baal Tosif, of adding to the Torah. That's prohibited. Nowadays, if you ask Chabad, if you ask Breslov, they make no distinction between rabbinic law and Torah law. And this is what my group fights against. There's a huge distinction. And we even have a principle. Safek derabanan lehakel, that if you have a question on a rabbinic command, we're lenient on it. But Safek deraita lehumra, that if you have a question, Torah command, you have to be strict, because the Torah command is somewhat everything outside the Torah is there to protect, including Tanakh. The books of the prophets are not there to build a new religion. Well, as a matter of fact, not even a prophet, according to the Torah, could add a new commandment or could change an old one. The job of the prophets and the books of the prophets are only there to bring you back to Torah. If it's getting you to build any other new idea, it failed in its mission and it has to be tossed away. Now, mind you, Christianity is built off of the hyperbole that appears in the prophets.
It's possible. I mean, I'm not really an expert on that kind of stuff, so it's hard for me to even tell you what I think. I agree with you on many points. Like, definitely, books of prophets should be only considered as a way to the Torah and not as like a separate, promise or religion. I definitely agree with that, and I definitely agree that Torah law should supersede all other laws. But what I was going to tell you, and you kind of interrupted me there, that it seems to me that you take a lot of your ideas not from the Torah. Like all your understanding seem to be based mostly on the oral Torah, which is totally understandable considering like who you are. But if you really want to see what's going on, I highly suggest you concentrate on Torah. Forget everything you know, as if you never heard any of that, and just read the Torah from the beginning to an end. It actually is best to listen to it, because Torah commands it anyway. So just listen to it and see what it says. Forget all the commentaries. Forget the meanings that you already know. Just listen to the plain meaning of the Torah, and you will see that it makes completely different sense when you listen to it like that. It's like...
I don't think completely different. I don't know. I think that we could both agree that the most important parts of the Torah are the ethical parts. I understand the Torah as ethically as you understand it. So we may disagree on ceremonial, correct?
Yes, perhaps. I'm just saying that it seems to me that you take a lot of your ideas not from the Torah, and this is the big mistake that you're making. You have to really reconsider your position, because I agree with you. I agree about rabbis and all that stuff that you talked about. I agree, but the problem is Sanhedrin, for example, is not in the Torah. There is no such thing. Maybe it was. I'm not arguing about that. Maybe there
Say it again. I'm sorry. I got cut off.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was saying that Sanhedrin is not found in the Torah as a separate entity. Maybe we're supposed to have it. Maybe we don't. But it's
semantics. Beit Din Hagadol, the great court or the court, exists in Torah. As a matter of fact, the Torah never instructs anyone to interpret the Torah on their own. The Torah was trying to build a society, which is why it had judges.
Putting too much emphasis on judges. Judges decided only civil matters. If somebody came to a judge about the matter of the Torah, they would direct them to the Levites or to the priests.
I don't think it makes a distinction. It says
it does
if an area of Torah law seems too difficult for you, it says take it to the priest, to the judge, to the Levites. But it doesn't really make a distinction, and it says that their answer will be Torah unto you. So
it does make a distinction. It does make it. It says to the Levite or to the judge, depending on the matter. If it's a civil matter, you go to the judge. If it's a Torah matter, you go to the Levites, because only Levites could.
It doesn't say that
from Tzaras. Yes, it does. That's what it implies. Why would different things? Why would it say?
Saras is a different section. In terms of Saras, is a different issue.
It's not
the Torah issue.
It's the same. It's all.
But he gives an example. It says between blood and blood, between blow and blow, one person striking another, capital punishment, blood and blood. Some people say blood and blood could be in terms of neither blood. It ultimately doesn't give a distinction of what a judge does and what a high priest does. Now, yes, mind you, a high priest does decide between states of purity and impurity, but outside of that, it makes no distinction. But I think that in the most important parts, in the ethical parts of the Torah, you would agree that an Orthodox Jew and a Karaite, I'm not sure how you identify yourself, see things like basically eye to eye.
Excuse me?
I think that you would agree that an Orthodox Jew and someone like yourself would view the Torah ethically on the same level, correct? Ethically.
Well, it's hard to say. It depends what we're talking about. Because I disagree with a lot of ethical decisions of the rabbis. So, what do you mean? I'm going to take it the same? No, I'm completely against rabbis and oral law. I'm sorry, Asher. I just view about this completely.
You could be against oral law, but ethically, do you make a distinction between ethical law and ceremonial law?
Well, yes, of course. There are different commandments for that. So, what specifically are you asking me? I just don't. Give me an example, please.
I think that your disagreement with the Orthodox community is completely on a ceremonial level and not on an ethical level.
Okay, it's possible. Give me an example. I don't understand what you're trying to say. Can you give me an example, please?
You don't think that Orthodox Jews feel that it's okay to steal or to rape or to murder?
Well, I hope so, no. But there are a lot of troubling things in the Talmud, as you know, in the Mishnah. So...
that's not legal. It's not command. There's no Orthodox Jew who walks around stealing nowadays thinking that he's in some way justified to do so. I would say, by the simple fact that most Jews are like lawyers and judges. They respect the law in a civil society.
For example, I was a witness to a Kohen. I had a Kohen who I knew here in Los Angeles. I went to his house one Shabbat, and he had a Shabbos goy, and I felt really uncomfortable, because even though
that's not part of the oral law. The oral law doesn't teach one to have a Shabbos goy. There's Jews who have it, but they're violating a halakha. You're not supposed to have a Shabbos goy, with the exception of to save your life.
You can't have servants in your house on Shabbat. You can't, even if they're goys. You can't have paid goyim working for you on Shabbat.
Right, that's what I'm saying. You cannot. Right, I agree. Yeah, but halakha also agrees. The Rambam never says that you could have a Shabbos goy. The Talmud doesn't say you could have a Shabbos goy. They do these things in spite. I think that the vast majority of things that you disagree with Orthodox Judaism about is not part of the oral law, but it's just a twisted man-made tradition that doesn't even appear in the Talmud. And by the simple fact that you told me that you came from Chabad, it really tells me a lot. That your grievance, that if you actually knew what the actual oral law was, you realize that this is actually helpful for a community. If God wanted us to progress ethically as a nation, you agree that there has to be some sort of standard, some consensus on how we do things, how we keep Shabbat, how we keep Yom Kippur, right? There has to be some, even Karaites have a consensus of what's allowed and what's not allowed outside the Torah. So, in other words, they've created their own oral law.
We have written Torah for it. Everything in the written Torah is completely understandable to me. I, for one, do not understand why you do not see things that I see. Like, for example, you telling me like Levites and judges, for example. Or another good example is how to slaughter an animal. When I read a verse about slaughtering an animal, I see the description how to do the slaughter. I don't understand why rabbis don't see it, you know. I can tell you if you want, you know.
No.
If you're interested.
I mean, I am interested. I'm familiar with the portion. In terms of when it says instructed in the way that I showed you, I have no problem assuming that just means to cover the blood. But the actual act of slaughtering animals, I don't think is explicit enough not to cause offshoots. In other words, only because someone doesn't see things your way, and I think this is the purpose of the Sanhedrin and the judges and what we call oral law, not to limit Judaism to one person's understanding, but to take a consensus of all the Torah scholars in the nation to, in some way, point Israel in the right direction.
General consensus, but I don't think God intended us to be like in the army, you know, everyone wearing the same thing or everyone doing these things exactly the same way. No.
But that's what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 17. It says that you go up to the place that God will choose, and they will give you Torah.
Yes,
sorry.
You interrupted me. You haven't let me finish. There were a total of 13 tribes. So if you're not counting Levites, it's 12. So at least there are 12 ways of doing things. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 12 tribes. We would have one tribe. So there is a general consensus. I agree, and that's decided by the Levites and judges appointed by the Levites. Not judges appointed by judges, prophets, or God knows who, just the Levites.
Yeah, the Torah doesn't say that Levites appoint judges.
Yes, it does. Who appointed the first judge?
I mean, Moses. All right, so Moses was a Levite.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it never instructed Levites from now on to appoint judges. I mean, judges ultimately appoint judges. It applies like that today.
Today, God knows what's going on. That's what it means. That's why it doesn't say anything else. That's sufficient to understand. If Moses was a Levite, then the only people who can appoint the judges are the Levites. And that makes perfect sense because Levites they're separated.
So that's why we need a consensus, because it's not clear to me. So when you're dealing with a legal system that has a death penalty in many of its laws, that you would have to have an elected body. Okay, fine. If you want to believe that only Levites...
The death penalty was decided by one judge. What are you talking about? If somebody, maybe in some difficult cases, maybe like several judges, but I don't think that's even the case. I think each case was decided by the judges was assigned to. So, otherwise, again,
Deuteronomy chapter 17 says, it says, Dam bedam, nega venega, and it's talking about the judges of that day. It's not one person. Now, yes, I understand Moses, that when the person was gathering sticks, he went to God and God told him to kill him, but that doesn't mean that one judge puts people to death. This is why there has to be a consensus.
You see, that's the difference between us. You bring in some outside meaning to the Torah, some judges, some Sanhedrin, some...
I'm just quoting Torah.
I'm telling you, forget everything you know, read the Torah, and you will see that it's not how you see it.
I'm very Torah-based. I'm not basing anything outside of it. I understand that there had to be a court. The Torah never instructed people...
Asher, if you're Torah-based, why do you need oral law? Please, tell me. You don't need it. Torah never gave it. God never gave oral law. God gave only 10 Commandments and the Torah, and the written Torah. That's it. There is no oral law. It's a made-up belief. You understand that?
But we believe that the oral law are the rulings of this court. I don't believe the oral law was given to Mount Sinai.
Okay, then it's just made up stuff. It's just a tradition, sure. I respect tradition, but I do not.
It may be made up, but it was sanctioned by the Torah itself.
That's what you think, but that's not what I think.
That's what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 17. What they instruct you.
Yeah, I mean, this is how you interpret it. This is how you interpret it, but this is not how I interpret it. So
this is why we need a consensus. We need someone to decide. If everyone was left to interpret Scripture on their own, then...
Yes, sure. And are you a Levite?
Am I a Levite? No.
Then you should yield to me because I'm a Levite in this conversation. I have the authority. So are you gonna listen to me or not? I'm a Levite.
First of all, you have to... No, wait, hold on. It says the Levites of that day on the Temple Mount. It's not just Levites in Galut. I mean, in the exile.
The Temple Mount? Show me exactly.
It says on the place. It says that they will judge in the place that God will choose. So whether that's Shiloh, whether that's, if you're Samaritan, Mount Gerizim, that's Yerushalayim, it's for sure not America. This is why, rabbis in LA...
Yes. Right now, there is no place that God has chosen. You know that really well. But there are Levites, and I'm alive, and I'm here. So, once again, it's a matter of listening to Torah or listening to what you believe. If you
the Torah says that Levites, Kohanim, and judges judge from the place that God chooses. In other words, the place where the temple stands, or the Mishkan, or whatever.
There is no temple, but there is no Mishkan. There is no temple.
Right. So we have the rulings of this court documented already. This is what's called the Mishnah.
I don't believe it. I don't accept it. I don't accept it.
That's fine. You don't have to accept it. I'm just saying that the Torah itself gave the authority to a group of people. So whether you believe that these rabbis in the Talmud are that group is a different story. But there was a consensus at one time. Now, you believe that this court in some way disappeared once they entered the land of Israel, and I believe, like the Tanakh states, that this court existed all the way to the 3rd century of the Common Era, when they were completely abolished.
Okay, that's fine, but I never believed in the court in the first place. That's what you think. I don't believe in any Sanhedrin. I'm sorry.
Forget about the word Sanhedrin.
Okay,
you said whether you believe in Kohanim and Levites and judges, correct?
Appointed by Levites, yes. Appointed.
Okay, fine. So, isn't that a court?
Sure, it is a court. You can call it that way, but it's not like legal, like an organization or something, They function completely independent from each other, They just go from, say I have a simple case, then judge decides it, and if I have a difficult case, then
it clearly says that they will judge from a place God will choose. That means they were all judging from the same place.
But today it's not the case. Today we don't have the place.
No, forget about today, right? Not even rabbis today have the power.
And we don't have those judges that you're talking about. All we have are the Levites. We have Levites and we have Kohanim. That's the only people who we as a nation have preserved. We didn't preserve the judges.
I don't even think we preserved that. Kohanim nowadays and Levites have no real hazaka to their lineage.
Who canceled that? Tell me.
You can't verify it. How can you verify you're an actual Levite? Even in rabbinic tradition. Now, this is not... You don't believe in this.
I did a DNA test. I can send you my results.
The group of individuals that were initially linked to that DNA test didn't even exist when the temple was established. So that group could also be false. You have many Ashkenazim with blonde hair and blue eyes claiming to be Kohanim nowadays. So how can that be possible if a Kohen can't marry outside of this group?
Asher, I can judge only from where I am.
I'm just trying to rationalize where we disagree.
Yes, you just think that I don't have authority because of your beliefs, but I do because that's what the Torah says. And
the Torah says that you only have authority on the temple.
No, that's not what it says. That's what you think it says, but it's not.
It says in the place that God will choose.
Yes, but there is no place today. That's what I keep telling
you.
There is no
place. Why you don't have authority today?
What do you mean I don't have authority? Who else is supposed to decide matters of the Torah?
Once we repent... No, hold on. It says that once we repent, God is going to bring us back, And then he's going to establish our former glory. That means there's going to be another Mishkan. There's going to be Kohanim, Leviim, and then you'll get your authority back.